Representative Barrero, you're recognized to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the bill on interests of foreign countries, which we heard yesterday.
Are there amendments?
None on the desk, Mr. Speaker.
Members, we're going into structured debate on CS for SB 264. The debate will be limited to 20 minutes per side in 10-minute increments. Total debate time is not to exceed 40 minutes. Representative Gottlieb, you're recognized to begin debate, and the clerk will start the debate clock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the floor to Representative Bartleman.
Representative Bartleman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would love to be able to vote for this bill. And I believe that we should protect our state and our nation from nefarious influence of these countries of concern. And I, like many others, have deep concerns about the dangers posed to the U.S. by China. So much so that I was originally a co-sponsor of this bill. But words on the page matter. And the problem with this bill is that the words are not entirely consistent with the good intent of this bill. The vague and inconsistent language risks harming people who were never the intended targets of this legislation. There were opportunities to listen to the concerns of so many citizens and permanent residents of our country when they spoke about the potential unintended consequences of the words in this bill. Even if we ignore those citizens' cries for help as coming from uninformed individuals who just don't understand this bill, perhaps we should have listened to the informed legal opinions of so many attorneys about the words in this bill, including words like member of the People's Republic of China. I wish that we could have pulled back long enough to fix this, but that didn't happen. Believe it or not, if this bill mirrored the legislation in Texas, I would be an upvote all day, every day, because they got the language right. My recommendation, even now, would be to pull back and refile this bill next year and fix the language so that there can be no risk. There should be absolutely no risk of discriminating against people who do not deserve it and who should not be prevented from pursuing their American dream. I am very sorry because I understand the intentions of this bill are great, but I cannot support this legislation in good conscience knowing the unintended consequences of the words on the pages of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Benjamin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me now yield time to Representative Marie Woodson.
Representative Woodson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I truly appreciate the efforts of my two colleagues, I have some issues with the bill. I truly understand the importance of security threats, and I support reasonable restriction based on actual threats. I take this issue very serious. The problem that I have, I believe that this bill would lead to discrimination between people. The criminal penalties actually for the sellers would lead to profiling. We might turn neighbor against neighbor. Profiling people based on where they were born is not a good practice. We have no control over where people are born. They have no control over that. National borders also change all the time. You can do whatever you want, but only if you come from the right place and say the right things. That is not America, because if I choose it as my home, I want to be able to buy a home if I need to and don't have to be subjected to anything. I would support reasonable restriction if they're actually from actual threats. If we pass this bill, I know that the bill can harm some people, even though that's not the intent of the two people who filed the bill. So for those reasons, I will not be able to vote with my colleagues. I hope you can work on the bill and make it better so all of us can support you. Thank you.
Representative Benjamin, recognized and continue debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We yield back the balance of our time in this segment.
Having yielded back the balance of their time, Representative Snyder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We ask that you recognize Representative Burfield in debate.
Representative Burfield, you're recognized in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member of the freshman class, I'm excited. We have 7 years ahead of us where we get to address, we get to clarify, and we get to modernize a number of issues that are facing our state. But what I think I'm more excited about is the fact that we collectively will have the opportunity to envision and to implement legislation that will protect and preserve our natural resources. When you think of Florida, one of the things you naturally think of are the resources that we're blessed with. The transformation that Florida has gone through in just 20 years is really eye-opening and at the same time concerning. While some of the circumstances are out of our control completely, other matters can be controlled and maintained by us, by each of us in this chamber. Foreign entities are purchasing land in America. Currently, it is reported that the Chinese entities own over 200,000 acres within the United States. Chinese investments in America agriculture sectors have grown tenfold in the last 10 years. Our resources are being threatened, and we have a responsibility. We need to protect them. We are the free state of Florida, but we need to be known as the free and sustainable state of Florida. The reality is this is about food security and sustainability. Security for our families, for our friends, and for our constituents. We discussed yesterday taking care of others. Well, we can't really take care of others if we can't take care of ourselves. So I hope you will join me in supporting this piece of legislation and the preservation of our resources today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that you recognize Representative Alvarez in debate.
Representative Alvarez, you're recognized.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the recognition. And unfortunately, I rise not only for the defense of our country, but for the defense of common sense when it comes to a common enemy that wishes to do us all harm. Today, we talk about unintended consequences, but we take into no account what consequence will there be when we are under the boot heel of the Communist Party of China. You look and you laugh. You raise your eyes and you wonder, why would he say things like that when that's not realistic? We have been actively engaged against the Chinese army for over 25 years, whether you know it, whether you want to accept it, or whether you face the reality that faces us today. It is what it is. I remember when I was stationed in Korea on the border with North Korea, we faced the Chinese more than we faced the North Koreans. That is a fact. Today, we bring the fight to our state, and you tell me, oh, what about the unintended consequence? Ladies and gentlemen, you yesterday voted to put the barrier to 1 mile near a military base. Do you not recognize that with a simple poll, I go to Kmart, I can do signal intelligence against MacDill Air Force Base today within 1 mile with the basic tools that we find at a Kmart, a Walmart, a Target? Yes, I know Kmart's out. That's probably the Chinese fault too. But let's get serious, because this is very, very serious. You ask us to hold on to act today when today is already too late. When today our country has asked us to step up and we are leading. I understand there is no such thing as a perfect bill, but there also is no such thing as a perfect state if one won't exist. This will go back to the Senate, and I pray that what we get back from the Senate is something that we can look at our country with pride when we send it up. Mr. Speaker, this is a good bill.
Representative Snyder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We waive the remainder of the time in this block.
Having waived the remainder of the time in this block, Representative Benjamin, you're recognized. Representative Benjamin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would now like to recognize or yield time to Representative Escamani.
Representative Escamani, you're recognized.
Thanks so much, Mr. Speaker. I first just want to make for the record that no one back here is laughing or raising their eyebrows, because this is a very important issue. So I want to clarify that. And I don't think it's appropriate to draw those assumptions when the floor channel can't see us back here. So let's be thoughtful to that, members. Second of all, many of you know that I'm an Iranian American. And so this issue is very sensitive to me because I absolutely agree with the concerns of holding countries like Iran under the current regime of the Islamic Republic accountable and ensuring that we do not allow them to have any type of influence in our government, influence in our systems. And if anything, as we pass on this House floor, we push members of Congress to do more to fight for a free Iran. And the same mentality is held with my Cuban brother and sisters for their government, for those identify as Venezuelan, for those that, of course, are Chinese Americans who leave China to come here to live and experience the American dream. And so, no, members, no one is laughing, and no one is not aware of the seriousness of this. And for those who serve in our military, I thank you, because freedom is not free. And we have to protect our borders. And following the tragedy of September 11th, this country, 45 days later, passed the Patriot Act in a bipartisan fashion. And following that decision, there have been many concerns between the lines of security and freedom. And so those are the questions we grapple with. Those are the conversations we're having. And that is what many of us are debating, is what is that balance? How do we strike the best balance where we don't have what are unintended consequences where we could be discriminating against someone who looks Asian because they want to buy a house? And so I thank the bill sponsors for the amendment yesterday, because I do believe it tries to strike that balance. It tries to be thoughtful and intentional. It's listening to community feedback. So I thank you both for that. I will say that I still have concerns with the criminal penalties, because we could potentially be creating an environment where someone does not want to sell to someone because they're Asian American, because they will also be held liable for that. And that will create a discriminatory environment for anyone who looks Asian American. And as an Iranian American, I have been called a terrorist. I have been called a foreign spy. I've been told as recently as this week on my Facebook page to go back to where I came from, despite the fact that I was born and raised in Orlando. And so those are the realities for many of our community members who are navigating constant discrimination, whether you experience it or not. And so I just encourage members to be thoughtful to that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Representative Benjamin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield time to Leader Driscoll.
Leader Driscoll, you're recognized in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Rep. Escamani, for bringing us back and focusing on what matters in this conversation, and for reminding us that we all care about national security, regardless of whether we sit in this chamber, regardless of whether we wave the blue flag or the red flag. We are all Americans, and we all care about national security. And I'm going to tell you why unintended consequences matter. In this building, with the work that we do, we don't always get the warning that there are bad unintended consequences in a bill, but we have them here. And so I'm going to tell you, if you intend on marching forward, you're not only ignoring the unintended consequences, you are doubling down. Let me share concerns specifically about the bill. I'm concerned that this bill commits national origin discrimination. And I know there's been a lot of talk about WeChat groups and the Communist Party of China whipping people up into a frenzy. Let me tell you something about me if you don't know. I am a Harvard and Georgetown educated lawyer. I can read a bill. And I don't need anybody telling me what a bill says. I can do that on my own. And I'm here to tell you that regardless of what anybody said outside of this building, that bill has national origin discrimination. There is no definition of what it means to be a member of the Chinese Republic of China. There's no definition. As best I can tell, it probably just means being a Chinese citizen. I asked the bill sponsor yesterday for a definition. There was none. There's none in the bill. They couldn't provide an answer. I asked whether it's possible to be a legal permanent resident of these United States and also be a member of the Republic of China, and the answer was yes. That lets you know automatically that there's discrimination in this bill on national origin. The bill sponsor admitted yesterday that it's possible to be both. There's no definition of domicile. I asked for a definition of domicile. None in the book. Was told to look to federal law. But the reality is we're passing state law. We don't know whether to look to federal law, if there's another definition we should look to in Florida law, or do we look to common law, what the courts have said. There's no definition of domicile. It violates the First Amendment right to the freedom of association. We talk about what makes America great. Yeah, our military might is part of it, but I'm here to tell you that our Constitution is the other part of that. And if we're willing to go back on our Constitution that we proclaim in this building so much and so frequently than we love, then we are no better than the countries of concern that we have put in this bill. What makes us different is that we are a nation of laws, of the rule of law, and that no one is above the law. But let me tell you, nobody's beneath it either. The affidavit and registry violates the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. We've had governors of this state that have used that Fifth Amendment right, so I know y'all are all familiar with it. We see it in movies. You know what the Fifth Amendment right is. There's no enforcement mechanism. We asked about that yesterday. Who is going to enforce this? Realtors? You're going to make them have to put their license at issue and punish them with criminal penalties if they sell to somebody who happens to come within the purview of this bill? How are they going to enforce it? Ask people who they think might have Asian characteristics whether or not they are. Come on. We are better than this. My mom always said, she would always tell my sisters and me that you could either do things fast or you could do them right. Sometimes it's very difficult to do things fast and right. And I think with this bill, we're moving too fast and we need to slow down. I appreciate the bill sponsors, both in the House and the Senate, and the Speaker being willing to have conversations about the bill that the Texas Senate recently passed, which has language that, while it's not perfect, avoids a lot of this national origin discrimination that we are also very concerned about. And I think we need to take a pause and really take a look at that bill and see if that would be a better move. And if we're not willing to do that this session, that's okay, members. We'll be right back here in September and in January, and we can do the right thing then. I just want to go back to the point that I was making about the group chats. And I know there have been group chats. There were protests all across the state of Florida. This would have passed without any problem if only people had kept their mouths shut. Let me tell you something. It's possible for two things to be true at the same time. It's possible for people to march and whip up into a frenzy, and maybe those people don't have the best intentions. I don't know. And it's also possible for this bill to have discrimination built into it, and it does. And you've received the warning. You've received the warning. Put aside the emotion. I'll even bring my tone down. Put aside the emotion. Take a look at the bill, at the plain text. We have to ask ourselves, I know in this chamber we don't have, I don't think, any Chinese American representation in terms of a member, but we have to always be asking that question, who else should be a part of the conversation? And if they were here, what would they say? And I think they might just encourage us. They might just encourage us to stop. We cannot do this on the backs of the Asian American community. We cannot do this on the backs of Representative Ana Escamani and her community. Members, I ask you, or the Cuban community, members, I ask you to please vote down. Thank you.
Representative Benjamin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the balance of our time to Representative Joseph.
Representative Joseph, in the last remaining minute.
This month marks not just Haitian American Heritage Month, but Asian American Pacific Heritage Month. This is in a period where our Asian community has been the target of countless acts of violence. I need y'all to understand the connection between the policies and the impact on people. Representative Driscoll, Leader Driscoll, just identified the national origin discrimination concerns. And I want to reiterate them. And it's not because we don't care about national security, we do. But in every instance where this country has decided to target a particular group of people based on their race or national origin, the argument has always been national security. So I just want you all to understand that we care about national security, but not to encourage discrimination. Discrimination is not an intended consequences. It's plain on the face of the bill. Thank you.
Representative Snyder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We ask that you recognize Representative Waldron from Representative Barrero's desk.
Representative Waldron, you are recognized from Representative Barrero's desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is not an anti-Chinese bill. This bill is about a pro-U.S. bill. This bill protects our state, all of our residents, and our country from the undue influence of countries engaged in activities seeking to harm us. Countries consistently showing us very publicly that they seek to undermine our democracy, disrupt our economy, and spread misinformation. We saw this firsthand with this bill when more than 100 people came to the State Affairs Committee for the bill's final committee hearing. I was later told virtually all of them were bussed in from Texas by the AALC. Along the way, they were lectured by the organizer of this trip that this bill will force them out of their houses or worse, allow us to deport them, none of which is true. They were told this bill is against the Constitution and that things like this are reasons for, quote, overthrowing the government. I have this video and it's been sent to the appropriate people. Meanwhile, Chinese American proponents of this bill who live in our state were too scared to show up and instead watched the proceedings via live stream. Out of the 74 comments posted during the live stream, all but 2 expressed their, quote, strong support for the bill. They have been calling me, emailing me, and texting me with their stories of intimidation and harassment. So I ask you, which of these 2 groups should we be defending and protecting? The communist threat to our nation is real. We have seen in recent weeks the illegal police stations the Chinese Communist Party has set up throughout our nation, the surveillance balloons traversing our country, the IT farm locations set up to enable the CCP to disseminate false information pertaining to our elections, our foreign policy, and other issues. While there has been a very vocal group of Chinese Americans opposing this group, I would invite you to look more closely at where those protests are germinating from and where the protesters who have shown up here and throughout our state in recent weeks actually live and what groups they are associated with before believing what they are selling you. A WeChat group was set up by the Chinese American community supporting this bill. A few days later, the group chat was shut down by the Chinese owners of WeChat. A supporter of the bill who showed up at the State Affairs Committee was threatened by opponents of the bill. She was told, quote, she shouldn't be there. You need to leave. And pictures of her were taken by several members of this group. She now fears retribution for herself and her family back in China. We are elected to represent our district and to move our state forward, and sometimes these decisions we make are not comfortable ones, but are necessary. Do not be intimidated by the vocal and aggressive actors we have seen in the past few weeks who do not have our country's best interests in mind, but quite the contrary. This bill seeks to ensure we protect all of our residents, particularly our Chinese American community who came here seeking a better life, freedom, and to get away from the Communist Party. This bill's intention is meant to protect us all from harm and keep us safe. And while we must protect human rights, national security is the one issue that predetermines the possibility of exercising these human rights and our freedoms.
Representative Snyder, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We waive the remainder of our time in totality.
Having waived the remainder of the time in totality, Representative Barrero, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, if you walk to House Office Building Room 315 on the hallways of that office, you will find a sign that says, "Food is a weapon. Don't waste it. Buy wisely, cook carefully, and eat it all." You keep walking down that hallway, you're going to see another sign. It says, plant a victory garden. A garden will make your rations go further. And it comes from a time during World War II when food was scarce and it was rationed to help supply our troops with food. Can you imagine being in a situation where you have to plant your own garden or depend solely on domestic food supply in order to put food on your table? That's what was the reality during World War II. And during a time where China threatens to invade Taiwan, or even tyrannical regime like Vladimir Putin's invades Ukraine and has made it his vocal mission to take over Eastern Europe, that reality is not unimaginable in the 21st century. Just a month ago, NBC reported in a news headline, Xi Jinping and Putin pledge a new world order as Chinese leader leaves Russia. Putin recently stated, "We are working in solidarity on the formation of a more just and democratic multipolar world order, which should be based on the central role of the UN, its Security Council, international law." This bill prevents a foreign country of concern from purchasing our agricultural land in Florida. Members, our critical food supply should never be held hostage to a foreign country of concern. To the folks who are concerned with Section 7 of the bill, this bill does not discriminate against Chinese citizens or residents. The only ones who this bill discriminates against are communist and totalitarian regimes. You want to know how I know this is true? Chinese Americans and Chinese residents who are here in Florida have been silenced, likely by China, for merely speaking out in support of this bill. Let me tell you a little bit about WeChat. WeChat is the largest standalone app in the world with over 1 billion monthly users. WeChat is sort of China's app for everything. It's immensely popular among Chinese and Chinese Americans. And here's another dark little secret about WeChat. It's one of the CCP's main tools for surveillance and censorship. User activity is tracked, it's analyzed, and it's handed over to the Chinese government in line with CCP party mandates. And it's an essential part of their surveillance network. Those who post information against the party's narratives face a backlash of consequences, including being banished and even imprisoned for sharing as little as one wrong post. Now, I can tell you, like Representative Waldron was testifying to, that dozens of groups in support of this bill have been shut down and they've been silenced on WeChat. I know Chinese people personally who have been silenced and denied access on WeChat merely because they came out in support of this bill. You put the two and two together. Look who's behind the opposition of this bill, guys. And I say that to you because I want to remind you, when you vote up, who you're supporting with this bill. To the Chinese Americans and residents who spoke out in support of this bill, who risked your life advocating on WeChat for this group, we see you, we hear you, you are heroes. I say this because we want to support freedom and democracy and the rights of the Chinese Americans who are truly victims of communism here. And this probably shouldn't surprise us. Just a few weeks ago, the FBI arrested 2 defendants on charges that they set up and operated an illegal Chinese police station in the middle of New York City. And their purpose was to influence and intimidate dissidents of the Chinese government in the USA. It's happening right here in your backyards. Harry Liu Jianwang, 61 years old, of the Bronx, Jen Jinping, 59, of Manhattan, they were charged with conspiring to act as agents of the Chinese government and obstruction of justice. In a separate complaint, nearly 36 Ministry of Public Service officers, CCP public officers, were charged with using fake social media accounts to challenge and intimidate Chinese dissidents in the USA and disseminate official PRC government propaganda. I'm going to read to you a little bit of Section 7 for those who are concerned. The following persons or entities may not directly or indirectly own or acquire by purchase, grant, devise, or descend any interest in real property in the state: the People's Republic of China, the Chinese Communist Party, or any official or member of the People's Republic of China or the Chinese Party, or any person who is domiciled, who lives over there in the People's Republic of China, and who is not a citizen or lawful permanent resident in the United States. If you are a lawful permanent resident in the United States, God bless you, purchase all the land you want over here. This bill does not discriminate against Chinese residents over here or Chinese citizens. But you want to know what? China doesn't afford the same privileges that we do. If you want to buy property in mainland China, you have to be living there. And that property must be residential. Why would we allow them unfettered permission to buy all of our real estate here in Florida? In fact, no foreigner, even in Hong Kong, is allowed to buy, lease, or inherit any land in Hong Kong. Members, we cannot sell the United States of America to a foreign adversary, and we cannot sell the United States of America to the Chinese Communist Party. I'm going to give you a few facts on Chinese purchases in the United States and why this is necessary. China is the #1 purchaser of USA real estate. According to the National Association of Realtors, China is the biggest purchaser, totaling $6.1 billion in assets from 2021 to 2022 alone. For the 10th consecutive year, the Chinese topped the list of overseas buyers of U.S. homes. That's why Section 7's in there, to prevent China and the Chinese Communist Party from purchasing up our real estate here in Florida. Give you a couple examples. I mentioned this yesterday. 140,000 acres. 140,000 acres, the size of counties. Properties the size of counties are being purchased up here. That Chinese military officer purchased that land, 218 square miles of land in Texas, right near Laughlin Air Force Base. 300 acres of land were purchased by a Chinese food manufacturer, the Fufeng Group Limited, right near Grand Force Air Force Base. If you're concerned about national security, you want to support this bill. And let's not pretend that China has our best interests in mind. The Chinese, we all know that they had spent a spy balloon to fly across the United States, and it was shot down because they were spying on the US of A. In China in 2021, Xi Jinping, he declared himself as China's new emperor by eliminating term limits and labeling himself chairman for life. Xi has crushed dissent, jailed opponents, and he's guilty of ethnic cleansing. Make no mistake, China has one goal in mind, and it's no secret that they seek to be the next leading superpower of the world. For a while, they've published their Belt and Road Initiative. If you don't know what that is, you have some time, I encourage you to look it up. Their Belt and Road Initiative is an international initiative to expand their system of transportation infrastructure through rail and ports around the world to make them the world's leading economic superpower. I'll give you an example. In Djibouti, debt-ridden to China, a port that was funded by China was taken over by China and now used as a military base in China. They promised them a grant. They later lied. They said it was a loan. They took over, and they made a military base out of that port. Members, we are at a crossroads in human history where the world is looking to be who is going to be the next world's leading superpower. Are we going to live in a free society where democracy, individual liberties, and that the United States is the strongest country in the world? Or are we going to reward totalitarian regimes in communist countries by allowing them to purchase up our land here in the United States of America? Members, let's tell the world that the free state of Florida is not for sale to totalitarian regimes. Please vote up on this bill.
Representative Barrero, having closed on his bill, the question now recurs on final passage of CS for SB 264. The clerk will unlock the machine and members will proceed to vote. Have all members voted? If all members voted, the clerk will unlock the machine and announce the vote.
95 yeas, 17 nays, Mr. Speaker.
Show the bill passes.
Because the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that